Julia and Michael, welcome back to Top Docs.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.
All right, so let's talk about the opening of the series, which is footage from police body cameras, and I think probably a lot of people have seen bits and parts and pieces of this, made by the police in Moab, Utah, after they had been tipped off that a man had been seen on the street slapping a woman. The police pull over the van, driven by Brian and occupied by Gabby, and we see the police talking to them about what happened. You'll return to this footage a few times. In fact, a fuller account, the footage bookends this first episode. And let's talk about all that later. But just this particular piece, why did you want to start here?
We wanted to open the show with the body camera just to show like the most visceral part of this story where there was essentially a really definitive crossroads in the crime. And we felt that it showed Gabby and Brian straightforward, unmanipulated, by any editing or anything like that. So we felt it was like a really captivating part to open the series. You see Gabby's vulnerability really clearly.
And since I think most of us know that it doesn't end well, the title of the series will tell you this. It's this moment where it's a decisive moment, right? The police could have said, stay in the car. Hey, someone's going to jail. You're both going to jail. It's this incredible key. I found myself saying, don't get out of I know, but don't get out of the car, Gabby. Don't go back.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real emotional stake here. It's also, I think, throughout the series, one of the things in Murders we talked about previously was how you really capture the sense of this town. You have this great opening scene with a boat, traveling at high speed towards a bridge, and there's these young people of different socioeconomic statuses in that boat, and the boat's gonna hit the bridge, and it's gonna set off this chain of events, almost inevitable. It feels like chain of events. Here, what I think is really interesting about this series, especially this episode, is how you sort of do this job of showing this relationship start and unfold over time. And there's recognizable parts of young relationships to it. And I think we probably at that age were in relationships that were a little desperate, you don't quite know what you're doing. And there's things about it that are outside the norm dramatically. And I think that this scene that starts really does start to capture some of that, right?
Yeah, that's important for us. That was really important because for us, it was, why is Gabby with this person? Why is she taking this journey with him? Why is she going down to Florida to live with him and his family and then taking this road trip? They were young. She was young. She was in love. What she saw in this person at the time, and from people that Julie and I spoke to, was Brian was a nice, shy kid and had friends, had a good group of friends. And it's important for us to show that because it's any relationship. No person gets into relation with someone that they're like, oh my God, this person's terrible. They're going to kill me, or they're going to abuse me, or they're going to isolate me and do this. That's not how it works. So it was really important for us, for people to see that this is just a normal relationship that deteriorated and ended horribly wrong. That was important because then people can connect to that and say, I've been in a relationship like that, or that's how it usually goes. It's not, you don't go into something and it's a crash at the beginning. There's people that care about each other. And then, that's what we felt that people could tie onto.
It is really tricky too, because you can't watch this opening and feel like, oh, Brian is from day one a monster, right? I think that's often what people want to do with, like a series like this, in the case of Murda, it's that obviously what the father did there is monstrous and incredible. But Brian doesn't seem like but we know what he eventually does something terribly, terribly wrong. One of the things I think you do a great job is bringing in friends. One of those friends is Rose, somebody who I just think, interestingly, Gabby met on Bumble, which is just like, wow.
I never heard of that. I didn't even know that was the thing. And then you can meet friends on a website. I didn't even know that was a thing.
I remember it being kind of like, I think it sort of was a dating app that became sort of a friend finding app kind of thing. I think I remember.
That's fantastic.
I was working in tech at the time, and I do remember that. And I thought that's really intriguing. And it's very interesting. We'll find out later why Rose might have been on Bumble and what, But for now, the other thing that Rose does, she charts a very different Gabby. We saw the Gabby who's panicked and anxious, and with the police, I understandably she'd just been in I'll say, fights with her boyfriend. The nature of which is a little bit unclear, but she talks about Gabby. No, Gabby's this wonderful person who brought light to my life.
Yeah, Rose brought to light, like you said, Gabby's light. Like it seemed like Gabby was the one that was really trying to help Rose with her own relationships that may have been in a dark place, or maybe Rose mentioned, like, maybe suffering some sort of form of depression, and that Gabby was kind of like the light at the end of the tunnel for her, and how just energetic and free and silly they were together was, it seemed very innocent, and Rose paints that picture, and then all of a sudden she kind of illustrates Brian as this person kind of behind the scenes that is kind of like inserting himself more and more into their relationship, Gabby and Rose's relationship. And there seems to be a tension of possession and jealousy potentially on Brian's part that Rose hints to. So she kind of helps really paint the picture of what their relationship was like first person.
Yeah, what's really interesting here is we're now seeing relationships that are, developing in this mediated realm where people have phones with them, cameras on them all the time, right? And so we see this growing relationship between Gabby and Rose, which, by the way, I found is really as interesting in some ways as the relationship between her and Brian. And there's so much to work with. And so she'll say something like, well, I was driving for Domino's and Gabby would come with me. And it's a nice little anecdote, but in this case, you actually show it. You show images and video of them in the car while she's delivering Domino's. It's almost like something you would have to do by recreation, or it could have been in a narrative film. This happens over and over again in this film, where you give us a little hint and then suddenly we're there. This is the first time you worked in a space where there's so much media just floating around that you can pick from.
Yeah, that was a big deal for us. When we went down, Julie and myself went down to Florida and first met with Gabby's family, and just understanding the amount of stuff. I think I remember it vividly. We went to a coffee shop in Sarasota with the computer and just went through it and just was on this journey with her. And we were like, wow, it's everything. Everything's documented. There's obviously the phones, and everyone's recording with their phones now. So there's that. But Gabby was recording everything. She recorded her journal because that's what she wanted to do. So it was something that we're like, wow, this is something unbelievable that we're going to be able to tell this through her experiences herself visually, which was really amazing.
One of the hints that this relationship is sort of going off the rails for me is obviously the controlling actions that Brian takes. We hear that he steals her ID so she can't go out with Rose, but also there's this whole interesting thing with I just thought it was interesting with Taco Bell, where she's working at Taco Bell. She's working 50 hours a week and she loves it, which is, I think if you work those jobs at that age, I did. I don't remember loving it. Occasionally you'd have a group of people, you thought it was fun, you go out after work, but you didn't love it, but she did. And Brian seems to take great offense at this. He even suggests that she's becoming a lowlife like the rest of the crew.
Yeah, I mean, Brian wasn't able to see her as much because she was always at Taco Bell working. So I'm sure he felt left out and just wanted to jab at her and kind of insult her with those text messages where he's saying like she's a lowlife, to kind of provoke her into apologizing and like making it seem like she needs to care for his, needs of being isolated from her in that moment. Yeah, it's a little, I don't know, when you're that age, I'm sure you always want to be tied to your significant other in a certain way that doesn't always make sense.
I think it's really intriguing too, because their lives are kind of a little precarious in that they are working at Domino's and they're working at Taco Bell, but Gabby sees this real potential kind of out from this, I think, right? So this road trip, and by the way, this is an age, I think a lot of us took road trips with friends, with girlfriends, boyfriends. We've gone on the road for a little bit. It was something I know I did. Back then, it was just something we did. And I remember doing it, and I did it because, why was I doing it? I was doing it under the influence of Kerouac and other kind of road trip books. Here, it isn't the literary influence in some ways that we do see Brian reading a book in one scene, but it's mainly about a possible platform. She sees it as a way of building this influencer life. He clearly sees that as yet another threat, right? He doesn't like this idea. He calls it stupid, but to me, it seemed like that it was another threat for her kind of escaping his grasp, having a potential audience, as she will later, of millions.
Yeah, I mean, like kids today or like young adults today, they want to take trips or do activities based on the fact that they're going to be recording themselves.
Right.
And whether it's branding themselves on a platform and becoming like a visionary and an influencer and monetizing it, or just doing it for their friend group and communicating that way. This is the new age of freedom and expansion and curiosity. I mean, Gabby was working at Taco Bell 50 hours a week so that she could take the road trip.
Right.
She was the one that paid for the van. She had all the ideas to design it. She was extremely industrious and artistic, and she had a good head on her shoulders. So I feel like she worked with Brian to kind of be the gas in her own tank of escaping, but then documenting it in real time. So it's a really interesting confluence of contradictions, essentially, because she's going into the wilderness, which is so isolating from all technology, but she's tethered to technology in her phone the whole time, which was a big, sore spot for Brian because he wasn't the number one.
Yeah.
Her phone was, and the camera was.
The other part here that to me was just fascinating was like it's not just like generally you want to be an influencer. It's actually part of a smaller group. Apparently, van life is a thing. I didn't know that. And you have two other van life bloggers who, I'll be honest with you, they are sort of what I more imagined. Which are Kyle and Jen Bethune. Did I get that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they say, when Gabby does disappear, they're like, the van life community immediately heard about it, of course. Like there's a van life community. So it really is interesting to see how there's also these worlds within worlds, I think, online. Was this an eye-opening to you as well?
It was also, they were dealing with COVID too. We're in that world, that time. I think that's where Bumble Friends comes into play too. It's like people are isolated and they're trying to find people, and van life, I think. And honestly, I didn't know anything about van life either. When we got into this, Julia knew about it, but I had no idea. I think it's kind of, it was catching on. It was becoming something. We thought they were interesting as well, as to see Gabby and Brian, and then to see these two other folks that have done it and they are doing it. I mean, they have children and they travel around and they are living that life. So yeah, it was interesting to have sort of them mirror each other.
Yeah, it's what Brian and Gabby could have become had they, there been not been these deeper issues, especially with Brian, clearly. I want to talk about the end of this episode because you come back to this police body cam footage. I had not seen this at this level of detail, and you go very, very deep. I was amazed by this. I will say in the second episode, when this footage eventually comes out after Gabby disappears, the family, understandably, and other people come down very, very hard on the police for not arresting Brian. And in hindsight, especially in hindsight, I think we can say that the decision they made to sort of futilely separate them probably was not the best decision. And I think that's been recognized. But what I find really amazing is seeing these police officers try to make a good decision. And really, they're talking about the law and what the law requires. And they're trying to figure out the law, what the law says and what they're supposed to do with the reality of these are young people. We don't really know what's going on. And then, one of the cops basically says, when victims tend to go back, they end up dead. So he knows what this eventually could lead to if it's not dealt with. What do you hear? I hear these people maybe not arriving at the best decision, but really trying to work it through and think it through.
I mean, I think it was really important for us to highlight the inner workings of the cops back and forth between each other about what they should do in terms of separating them. They don't have discretion for this. And I think it goes to their hands are tied, and the system that's tying them isn't perfect. And I think that's why Gabby Petito's family drafted legislation for a certain amount of questions to be implemented in police departments that they ask individuals in the situation to get more at the heart of potentially what is really going on behind the scenes.
It's very layered. I think that was the idea to show, because it wasn't just one set of law enforcement. There was parks officials there. There was the sheriff's office, and I think it's important that there's now actual, I think it's 10 questions they have to ask. I'm not sure what the legislation that was passed, because you're right. I mean, like, they're dealing with a situation that they're trying to work through. Obviously there was mistakes made, but at the end of the day, they're dealing with what information they have. Gabby, she was in a tough situation, so they have to kind of read through that, because she's not saying like, oh, he's hitting me, like she's saying she's the aggressor. So you're trying to cut through what is the truth. There was a witness that wasn't called. They only had one person that said they saw her hitting her. So there was some mistakes made, but they were also dealing with a super sensitive situation. And I think some of them were doing the best they could with what they had, but it was a tough situation all around.
Yeah, and those laws, thanks for bringing that up. Those laws for 11 or 12 questions that are supposed to be asked, I think have been passed by over a dozen states now. So
that's amazing.
Yeah, and I think this case helped push that along. And by the way, the parents and friends find some comfort in that. Gabby's parents were involved in helping push that in Utah, I believe. It's also in Florida where they live, or they still live there, or were living.
Yeah, they live there.
You also have body cam, which I had not seen at all, of when the police, after Gabby's disappeared and Brian has showed up at his parents' house with the van, the police approach. And again, it's very interesting to see the police torn between what the law says and their own sense, right? And so they'll say, the father's telling me no, he's giving me the attorney's card, he's saying he doesn't want to talk. At the same time, this is obviously suspicious. The van's here, it's not supposed to be here. We were told that he flew back. Why won't he talk to us? The daughter's missing. The parents won't talk to the other parents. I thought that was, again, amazing to see the struggle they were undergoing.
We got that towards the end that came out, right, Julia? I think it was through FOIA, but the FBI didn't release that till we were in the edit, and we were, I think, done filming. So it was amazing to see, because it was like you were there seeing what they were dealing with. You have the Long Island detective, Barry, who's like no nonsense New York officer being like, listen, this is bullshit, and trying to cut right through. The Florida officer who's like, listen, we have guidelines. I don't have to tell you. Yeah, it's suspicious. It's like watching it happen real time. And then, going up to the door to knock on the door and like seeing real time with Brian allegedly in that house behind them saying like, no, we're not talking. You're not helping. It's like seeing that stuff was really powerful, and, gave us the ability for the audience to see for the first time what Brian's parents were doing during the search.
Speaking of the FBI, two characters that you have here, I think you have two FBI agents, Kyle, I think just first name Kyle, right?
Yeah.
And Loretta Bush. And I thought they were so fascinating because they were so alike and so different. Kyle is, sorry, Kyle, but, sort of what you'd expect. He's this fit, matter of fact, white dude, She, on the other hand, is very fit herself and similarly sort of no nonsense in her delivery. They're both very they're FBI agents, but heavily tattooed. And what did you make of these two? I just thought they were fascinating.
Well, we always appreciate the FBI speaking with us and showing the inner workings of how they, went through this case. I mean, Loretta Bush is, like you said, she's very no nonsense, very direct, but you could tell that she really cared about this case in particular and the work she does with finding missing people. She had an emotional pull, and I think that came through. She was a very colorful person, inside and out from the little bits that we could see on camera. And Kyle too. Kyle was, very thoughtful, and all these steps that they take. It's great for the viewer to see like how layered and complex these investigations can get, especially when it's like nationwide.
And neither of them have ever spoken out before, so we were lucky to have them. Kyle, we only use his first name because he's on cases and he's in a world that the fact that he even sat for us was amazing. But Loretta, we knew when we saw her and spoke to her that she was going to be gold TV wise, and she was, and she got her own. She was a TikTok star. We talked to her afterwards, and they call her Hollywood in the bureau now. And we think it's fantastic that she had such a huge response afterwards as well.
Let me ask you about this. I think that's interesting because I think that's one of the things about Loretta is we find out this wasn't just a case for her it's part of what she feels and believes in. And I'm reading, it's going to sound like I'm going off base here, but give me a second. I'm reading Graydon Carter's great account of his life in magazines. He talks about Dominic Dunn, the famous former Hollywood exec who just fell out and then became this amazing writer. And Dominic Dunn became this chronicler of some of the biggest cases, like the original Menendez brothers case and the original OJ case. He never said he was objective. He never said, I'm an objective reporter. He had lost his daughter to murder, and he was there standing for I gotta say this right, standing for the victims and standing in for the families when he was writing. And I wonder, how do you kind of think about that when you're doing what you're doing? How do you think about your relationship to the material? Are you seeking pure objectivity? Are you Dominic Dunn, who's very much in the corner of the victim? Like, I'm sure it's complicated, but could you talk about that a little bit? How you think about that?
It's a great question.
It is. I mean, really, the position that I think I take when looking at these cases is really what's the whole story? What is the organic elements at play, and really going in with curiosity. Obviously, I can have points of view and want to be swayed internally either way, but as a storyteller, it's not always as interesting for me, at least, to go on imbalance on one side, because it could be perceived as maybe propaganda, and there's so much complexity to, the dark side and the sides that are like kind of squared up and rubber stamped and kind of look the other way and objectified. Let's say like the villain, of course, like in a comic book, like we were trying to really pull back from that and not make it a salacious story, but have obviously the hints of salaciousness be a momentum for the drive of the intensity of the story, but really have the vulnerabilities of all characters and all elements at play be front and center.
Well said. I'd love to say I'm Dominic Dunn and just leave it at that. No, but
Yeah, exactly.
You're dealing with humans and stories from the outside when you put something, when you're looking to tell it, and then when you get in there and you start having conversations and you start doing interviews, you don't go in with a complete, this is how this is going to be. But, some of these stories are laid out. It just becomes, who you're talking to, what are they saying? And those stories evolve. But specifically for Gabby, I mean, for the most part, you understand what you're going into to say this type of story, and you want to humanize everybody. Like we talked about earlier, where Brian's was not evil at early in this. So that's kind of our thing, is like humanizing them and not making them, this is a bad person from the get, and this was meant to happen. So it's a different story than, say, doing an OJ story where there's so many different layers to it, and the culture and the people and the time and all that stuff. It's just, they're different. It's just, every story is different.
Let me ask one more thing, which is one of the things I think is very interesting is that you use voice recreation technology to recreate Gabby's voice with her written journals. Can you talk about that decision? Just a few years ago, this was just considered kind of something you didn't do. Then we had the Andy Warhol diaries, which just embraced it completely, and I thought extremely well.
Bourdain.
Bourdain was the one that originally Morgan, had the challenge around that. Can you talk about making that decision, because it's a true decision, and you don't overuse it, but I just wonder if you could just briefly speak to that.
Just instantly, we wanted to figure out a way to bring her journals to life, her writings to life. For us, it's so important. We really try to stay away from talking heads where it's like a reporter or a journalist. Not saying that they don't add value to a show, that you want to tell the story mostly through the victim if you can, especially for the story. And that was Gabby. And we had so much material. So we were bouncing around ways to bring it to life. And was it going to be somebody else? Was it going to be an actress? Was it going to be a family member? And this came up, and we were all in on it. And the biggest thing was getting the family's permission, which we did. And from there, we were just like, let's go. I think this is the way. And I think that Hollywood, I think that people are going to, AI, it's going to be a huge part of the business moving forward. And I think that every situation is different, but as long as you're using the words that someone wrote like we did here. You're not changing. They're not making something up. We're not making up photos, right? They're saying it. It's a tool that is really powerful.
I noticed you did not do it for Brian's letter. You did not do it for Brian's mother burn after reading letter. Those you did not use as technology for. You specifically chose for her. And it sounds like a lot of that's because it's meant to really honor her in her absence. Is this sort of, am I thinking about this right?
Yeah. And bring her to life more, hear her voice or a voice that sounds like her so that the audience can just stay where you're not reading things on a page. It's distracting, or having an actor read something else. We felt like, particularly for Gabby's story, because this was someone that was living their life and documenting everything and having a van life and having a journal and having a YouTube channel, we felt like it was a very safe decision. And going back to the fact that we wouldn't have done it unless we got permission from the family. And hence that's why we didn't use say, Roberta or journals or whatnot. We didn't do it there.
I don't think I'm spoiling too much to say. After disappearing from his home, Brian was found dead in the park near his parents' home. And I found this whole sequence confusing. And I thought there were potentially implications that were happening here. Maybe the discovery that Brian was missing was driven by a call from within the house, as it were. After going missing, his parents in this enormous park, the parents drive right into the park and within a very short period of time seem to have found him. Let me ask you this question. You can answer or not. Is the implication that they knew what they were looking for and where they should be looking? Did they know what his plan was? Is that the implication?
I think that it's up to you to take, that's that. I mean, listen, first of all, it is convoluted because you have different things happening at different times. There's things that are happening. You have the FBI. You have this was a massive case that was being talked about real time by influencers and true crime experts and all that stuff. And the media was ahead of this in some cases, right, by like days, and the FBI was trailing. So I think that, I don't know, Julie might have a different take on did they know, but I would say that my sense is that the family knew the end of what was going to happen here. I think that Brian had hiked in that area many, many a time. So if he was going to go somewhere to do something, this would be the area. That would be the safest answer to that question. Was like, he's hiked there a million times. That's where he likes to go. Is there more things behind? I don't think anybody will ever know the truth.
I'm not crazy in thinking maybe there's something here, I think is what you're saying.
Julia.
Yeah, no, it blew up on social media. Like, people were, from the beginning, obviously very livid at Brian's parents for being so quiet and evasive. And then, of course, when the parents find him so quickly in that vast body of land, it does perk more questions.
Okay. We'll leave it there. I'll leave it there.
Yeah.
All right. I think
You got to ask them.
Yeah. I don't think they're talking. Like I said, I think you did a great job of capturing Gabby and also this relationship. And as you said, I think you do it very sensitively. You're not trying to demonize everybody from day one. I think one of the things you folks do very, very well, I saw this in previous work, but here especially, is the impact on her friends and family. You're able to sit down and really speak to these folks. Some of the stories, are about the loss. Rose saying it wasn't just her loss, is that someone felt he could take her away from me. Wow, that really hits. And also, as a father, just seeing the parents talk about this loss is just, very, very powerful and devastating. Can you talk about filming those scenes? It's got to be tough, and you don't want to re-traumatize people, and you don't want. How do you think about that? How do you think about engaging this incredible pain they're feeling at that moment?
Well, I think obviously they can speak from themselves, but in my experience, interviewing people that have been through immense trauma and, touching on that in the interview, like full force, I think that, first of all, we do very long interviews. We are very careful about if people need to take breaks and understand that they need to feel comfortable first and foremost. And once they start to talk about their experience and it continues to grow in a very long period of time with the exchange of the interview, I feel like it's a very cathartic experience for people. because their pain is never going away. So they have this pain inside of them. And I think, I mean, even like me talking about certain things in my life, it is healing to connect with another person about this and not just hold it inside. And I think when you're doing this for an audience, that must be so much more layered with cathartic nature that you have to ask them about. But it's really about the trust first and foremost between the interviewer and the subjects. And then it kind of grows from there.
Well, I want to thank you both for coming back. Really appreciate you being here today. And thank you for this film. As I said, for the audience, you may think you know all about this. It was widely reported on, but I think you're going to learn a lot about Gabby herself, probably most importantly, and her family and her friends and how they've responded to this. Thank you so much for being here today. Thank you for this series.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks, Michael.